fortunate having Mr. Ralph Nader with us. And most of this class period will be occupied with questions and answers that our economics class and our humanities class will have with Mr. Nader. Before we get into that, our student body president has something that the humanities class would like to honor, we think, Mr. Nader with, and that's our humanities award. And then from that, we'll go into questions and answers that have to do with this occasion, consumer interests and other kinds of public issues. Scott?
Every year we, the humanities program awards to the senior this award of the humanities. It represents the spirit of the humanist in our time, and it goes to those who have shown their watchguard spirit towards our consumer issues and various important issues in our time. So we think that Mr. Nader certainly exemplifies this. We would like to honor him with this award.
Thank you very much. I guess we can start now. I may just say a few things by way of orientation. Pardon me, I have an inflamed left side of the face temporarily, so it's a little bit difficult to speak, but I think you can understand. I'm not wearing these glasses because I admire the blues record. The subjects I'd like to cover today, I think you have similar topics dealing with environmental issues, consumer issues, automobiles, insurance, food, cosmetics, issues of pollution, issues of corporate power, how much power they have over our lives, proper area of government regulation, role of politicians, campaign financing, what influences them to respond to people's needs compared to corporate or vested interest, special interest needs. So, and also the media, television, access to television, maybe some of your criticism will get on television. So we can, I guess, open it up rather than just listening to a short lecture. Why don't we just start with some of the audience starting to comments and questions? You tell me this is the cream of the crop. I have very, very high expectations. Yeah.
Mr. Nader, the National Center for Disease Control on August 29th issued non-binding guidelines recommending that young students that have AIDS should be allowed to go to class. Now, in other articles that I've found, it is said that the action taken has been completely erratic. Do you think that we need some sort of a national standard, and can we apply any type of pressure to the Surgeon General to issue some sort of standard that we can apply whether or not kids should go to school? If they have
I think they're going to leave that to the local schools and local school boards, especially the government now in Washington tries to avoid making major decisions almost anytime. And a lot of times oriented toward letting the local school districts decide. It's too hard to live with.
As far as the corporate areas, where you're talking about the corporate power, there's been a lot of dealings in the last couple of years as far as mergers are going, putting a lot of money into mergers, and a lot of people are feeling that that's not beneficial to the economy. Do you think there's any type of government regulation possible, or that is necessary to have regulated mergers? Is there any way for the government to be involved in that?
Well, the antitrust laws have been on the books since 1890, and they're designed to counter the kinds of mergers which reduce competition. What's happened is very unhealthy in the last 10 years. All these tax breaks these corporations have been given, we got a terrific tax break, biggest one in history, the 1981 tax law, which, for example, led General Electric to make $6.5 billion in profits in 1981, 82, 83, and not pay a cent federal income tax. In fact, they got a $289 million refund. They would have paid $2.5 billion in taxes if they had the same rates as in the late 70s. Then they turned around and they bought RCA, which of course owns NBC. So these tax breaks were designed to let companies have more money to invest in productive activity and jobs, etc. And the record shows that huge amounts of these tax savings went into mergers and acquisitions, which have really no rational basis except to empire build for the companies that took over other companies, and the executives were just supervising a bigger act, so to speak. So our country is getting more and more concentrated in fewer giant multinational corporations, and that is not healthy for innovation, productivity, competition. They're just big bureaucracies. IT&T bought 200 subsidiaries in the 1960s, and for the last 6 years they've been spinning them off and selling them off because they couldn't digest them, they couldn't run them, they didn't know how to run these different companies from a management point of view. So they have to learn the mistakes all over the place.
What do you feel the best way to attack that would be? Would it be to go ahead and bring back the taxes, or would it be to
well, one is to prohibit the deductibility of debt which is obtained to buy other companies. For example, when DuPont bought Conoco, the oil company, for $6-7 billion, they had to borrow a lot, and the interest on that borrowing is deductible on their income tax. So they have in effect an incentive to go deeper into debt in order to acquire other companies. So if you eliminated the deductibility of the interest in other tax-free stock exchanges, you would eliminate what is in effect a public subsidy that encourages these kinds of mergers and acquisitions. The second approach is to crack down with the antitrust laws. I mean, right now, Republic Airlines and Northwest Airlines are merging. That means 73% of all flights out of Minneapolis Airport are going to be controlled by one company. Well, finally, the Justice Department is objective. I mean, it takes an extreme case like that for them to say we better apply the antitrust laws. There are two basic antitrust laws. One is the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, prohibits price fixing, which is a crime in our country. Two companies getting together and fixing an automobile price or clothing prices or whatever. And the second is the Clayton Antitrust Act, which is 1914, which goes after other kinds of mergers. You probably studied these two acts briefly, but they're one of the few laws in our country designed philosophically to deconcentrate the economy, to keep so it doesn't just fall into the control of a handful of giant corporations. Do you know how large some of these corporations are? What would you guess the gross revenue of Exxon was last year? Gross revenue. Not the profits, just everything it took in the cash revenue. Let's hear something. 21 billion? Anyone else? 30? It's 92 billion. It had a high of 104 billion a few years ago. It's a lot of money. I mean, they're really, to give you an illustration, the first U.S. company that hit $1 billion in sales was around 1906. It was U.S. Steel, 1960. It was really a big milestone. GM is up to about 91, 92 billion last year. And the next one is around 70 billion. It's, I think it's an oil company, Mobil Oil. Yes?
I have a question concerning big business.
Mm-hmm.
AT&T followed all the guidelines. You're saying it had such a huge share. And when we broke that up, we ended up with higher rates,
That's a good question.
two-page utility bills and stuff. What do you have to say about that?
That's a good question, because that goes into how you break up a monopoly like AT&T. If you break it up in one way, it can boomerang on you, and that's what's happened. They required AT&T. Well, AT&T wrote the draft breakup agreement. Once it decided it was going to sign an agreement with the Reagan administration, it wrote it the way it wanted to be broken up. And then the Reagan administration rubber stamped it. And they spun off the local bell companies, thereby giving the local bell companies a great excuse to raise prices, because it was often said that long-distance rates subsidized local rates. This is not true. They've never been able to prove it, but But that's the mythology. So when the long-distance AT&T company was broken away from the local Bell company said, well, we don't get any more subsidies for your local telephone bills from the long-distance rate. We got to increase the rates. So you're going to see a tripling of residential telephone bills between 1983 and 1987. In fact, it's already occurred in some areas like Washington, D.C. At the same time, these monopoly Bell companies, what's the one in your area? Pacific Television? Yeah. Well, they're going into other businesses in competition with companies who cannot use monopoly profits the way the Bell companies can. The Bell company's a monopoly, makes a tremendous profit. You've probably read about their stock market price increases, skyrocketing. And then they take some of these profits and they go into a business that competes with some small business, a computer business or a mobile telephone business, and we think that's unfair competition. So it was a very bad way to break up AT&T. Now the federal judge tried to make it a little better later on. He gave the yellow pages back to the local company. AT&T wanted to keep the yellow pages. That's $8 billion a year. So he gave the yellow pages back to the local companies, so they had to take their profits from the yellow pages and restrain their rate increases to your telephone and crank it into the calculation. So that's a good question because it's not just breaking up, it's how do you break up? You can break it up in a way where you get actually more monopoly power. Yes?
Now, this is a question about special interest groups in politics.
Sure.
They contribute a tremendous amount of money to individual campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And if we presume that money talks, then obviously the average citizen is going to be cut out of political decisions.
That's right.
How do you think we can limit the role of special interest groups and specialist scholars in political campaigns?
Well, first of all, this is what we call the golden rule of politics. He or she who has the gold rules. I'll give you an example. One day I was sitting in with a representative from California, and I was trying to encourage him to vote for a Consumer Protection Agency bill. It's a very small agency that would kind of be a gadfly on the federal agencies who are supposed to work for consumer rights, like the Federal Trade Commission, the Food and Drug Administration, the Auto Safety Agency. Would often knuckle under to the company pressures, and they don't issue the safety standards, or they weaken them, and so on, or they don't recall the food, contaminated food, or unsafe cars. So we wanted a little consumer group that could intervene, present the consumer viewpoint, and then take these agencies to court, where they violate their own standards of consumer protection. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I really like this proposal. If I vote for it, I'm going to lose $100,000 in campaign contributions in my local district for the next election. Well, it turned out he voted for it, and he lost the next election. And one of the reasons why is that the money that he ordinarily raised from the local auto dealer and the local insurance agent dried up, because there's a very organized lobby in Washington against the consumer bill of trade associations like the National Association of Auto Dealers, who had close ties with local auto dealers. And they would say, your representative voted for the consumer bill. Now, once I was sitting up in the balcony in the Senate watching a vote on aviation policy, and it went the wrong way for the aviation industry. And three guys got up, and they were so angry, they said, they were talking about the senator who defeated him. They said, that's the last time we're going to give that son of a bitch any dollars. Just like that. See, it's very much a quid pro quo. There are now 4,000 political action committees. There is the doctors, they have about a dozen, the auto dealers, the banks. There's even one, the chicken coop manufacturers wanted an investment tax credit for their members. And so they got a whole bunch of money together and they gave it to the House Ways and Means Committee, Senate Finance Committee members who pass on tax law. And well, guess what happened? They got their investment tax credit. Now the remedies are threefold. One is to cut them off at the pass by passing legislation which says we will have public financing available for any member of Congress or challenger But if any member of Congress or challenger to that member of Congress takes public campaign finance under certain ground rules and certain limits, those candidates or incumbents cannot take a dime in private money. So they're given an option. Now, in the post-presidential primary, you'll know Reagan and Mondale went for public financing. They all got about $35 million each from that checkoff, that dollar checkoff on the tax bill. And they were prohibited from taking any private money after the primaries were over because they opted for the public finance. That's one. The second, more fundamental change will require a constitutional amendment to the Supreme Court, in fact, said that. And that is to prohibit all private finance. Will Rogers, the Oklahoma humorist back in the 30s, once said that Congress is the best money can buy. And now Congress is the best money can buy. More versatile. So the idea is to have a constitutional amendment in that respect. But that's a long way out. And the third, excuse me, if you could just take it from this side. The third, hope it never happens to you. They say it's due to a draft. They call it taxi drivers. You know, the cab driver always has a window. Anyway, and the third approach is basically you say, okay, this incumbent senator has raised $6 million, like Senator Packard. He's raised more money than even senators from California. And you say, how do you counteract them? Well, I mean, Weaver is running against Packard. Okay. The only way Weaver can counteract that money is with a lot of volunteer help, a lot of canvassing, a lot of hot issues, so that the issues that he raises make the news and get across to people what he can't get across by buying television advertisements, political advertisements. And I think that a lot of people in this country, in politics, look at someone who's got a lot of money and give up. Like Senator D'Amato is running for re-election from New York. There are about 4 leading Democratic candidates. Elizabeth Holtzman, who was a member of Congress for years, Ferraro, Attorney General Abrams, and so on. They all dropped out. And every one of them said, this man's going to raise $10 million. And we just can't do it. We can't raise that much money. We're not that, shall we say, opportunistic or expedient. They dropped out. Well, the attitude should be, how do we build a new type of alternative campaign that generates issues and news and substance and volunteers to counteract the money? Sort of, you use footwork to counteract the dollars. And until we get that kind of thing going, people are going to be intimidated from going into politics if they don't think they have the kind of venality necessary to promise all these special interest groups that they will be supported in return for campaign coverage.
Digressing back to the business sector, are you telling me that you're an advocate of small business?
Oh yes, there's no doubt about it. The small business is the greatest producer of jobs, innovation. A lot of big business buy up these small businesses once they succeed.
Is there a higher rate of bankruptcy in small businesses?
Well, naturally, because they're a higher rate of risk takers. We want risk takers in the economy. And I'm glad you used the word rate, because obviously it'd be more absolute numbers because they're running a small business. And remember, the small businesses are about the only businesses in our country who are free to go bankrupt. If you're a giant corporation and you're mismanaged or corrupt, like the Continental Illinois Bank, and you're rushing toward bankruptcy, Uncle Sam bails you out. You don't go bankrupt. You go to Washington. You know, Penn Central was bailed out. Lockheed was bailed out. Chrysler was bailed out. If you're a small company, you can't do that. You can imagine going to Congress and say, I employ 12 people in corporate. I demand that you bail me out. So the only real capitalist competitive sector in our economy is small business. These giant military contracting firms like McDonnell Douglas, General Dynamics, they got 98% of their business comes from the Pentagon. There's no way they're going to be allowed to fail. In fact, the more inefficient they are, the more the Pentagon props them up with cost overrun supports That's what so much of the corruption comes from, because they know they got the Pentagon by the neck. And they know that General Dynamics is about the only company that can build nuclear cells. And so General Dynamics has a 300% cost overrun. What's the Pentagon going to say? General Dynamics is caught in criminal activity. The Pentagon puts them on 30-day or 60-day suspension, which of course means nothing because the contract's still going. They just held up for 60 days. They'd be held up anyway. Delay. And they can't do anything about it. Some economists have said, well, nationalize the defense firms. I mean, they have the worst of both possible worlds for the taxpayer. They're producing weapons that are often defective, fail, and which is really the only functional disarmament movement in this country. And they're enormously expensive. God, you've heard about the $450 claw hammers, like the kind you can buy for $12 in a hardware store here. Well, the company didn't say to the Pentagon, here's a claw hammer for $450. They had to give it a fancy name. You know what they called it? Just to show you where the creativity is applied, they called it a multi-directional impact generator. But that's penny ante stuff. The real thing is when you get weapon systems that are supposed to come in at $2 billion, including inflation, and they come in at $4, $6, $8 billion for the C-5A cargo flight. And some of them spend $1 billion and then they don't get one produced in it, like the DVAD anti-aircraft missile. They all get their special interests. You know, they get the company behind it, the labor union gets behind it, jobs are at stake, the Chamber of Commerce in Burbank and Marietta, Georgia, and so forth. It becomes an iron lock. Meanwhile, the taxpayer, see, the key to efficient government is to strengthen the taxpayer's ability to know and to sue to stop this sort of thing. And there are doctrines that keep the taxpayer out of the court. You say, who's the taxpayer? The taxpayer doesn't have standing to sue. Well, it's nonsense. When you imagine a steel worker gets up every morning, 5 days a week, on the side of Pittsburgh, goes to some of the most grimiest, dangerous jobs around in the steel mill, and ends up with $24,000 and pays, say, $5,000 in taxes to the U.S. government. And then reads that claw hammers are being sold for $450. That's like 11 claw hammers. What do you give that taxpayer? What power do you give that taxpayer to do something? Right to their congressman? You got to give them the power to sue and to have injunctions and to get the money refunded and to throw these culprits in the Pentagon out of the job because they're in cahoots often with it. Let me ask you, did anybody here pay $1 income tax last year? $1 or more? Anybody? $1 or more. Did you pay $1 or more?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you stand up, Mr. McGrew? I just want you to take a bow. Because, let me tell you why. You have paid more to the U.S. Treasury than the entire property casualty insurance industry over a 10-year period, during which it made $75.2 billion in profits and paid not a cent in federal income tax. You paid more. That's $75.2 billion, not million, billion, according to the Congressional General Account. You see, this is the kind of double standard that operates. These corporations are fictions. You know, they're artificial entities, they're not flesh and blood people. And they're extremely privileged, and they make these billions of dollars. The people who are really paying the bill are the people who go to work every day and have their taxes withheld. Yeah.
How is it that a huge corporation like Pepsi or Coke could duck the Sherman and the Clayton Antitrust Act and buy up to 7 companies? I mean, it seems to me like it'd be a little bit more.
You're right. They could not have done that in the 60s and 70s, whether under Johnson, Nixon, Ford, or Carter. But Mr. Reagan has decided that anything goes in terms of mergers and acquisitions. He's going to let the market play out, and he's he's not going to apply the antitrust law. The only areas he's applying the antitrust law is the highway bid rigging area. I mean, where they actually get together in a hotel room and rig the bids, price fixing. But in the area of horizontal mergers, acquisitions, they're not going to do it. And this is an example. Now, this would never have been even tried under the prior administration. They would have immediately moved to join. Yeah.
What is your solution to the problem of soaring insurance rates due to large damage awards?
Well, you see, you bought the line due to large damage awards because they've got. Have you seen those ads on TV? Mm-hmm. The lawsuit prices? Huh? What you haven't seen on TV is that the lawsuit prices is a phony. Now, last week, the National Center for State Courts, which is a statistical data collector for the state courts in our country, 50 states, no axe to grind, put out a report saying that there is no lawsuit crisis, that the number of personal injury suits filed in the United States, state courts, has gone up 9% since 1978, and population has gone up 8% since 1978. There are some large verdicts, but there are some very, very large injuries, like the asbestos injury, the IUD, the Alcon shield, that mutilated thousands of women. When you're dealing with a quadriplegic teenager, 40 years ago, no hope. Teenager wouldn't have survived. Now, modern medicine, technology, maybe $150,000 a year it will cost to keep that teenager alive for an expected life expectancy of 40 or 50 years.
So it's just the insurance groups that are putting
Yes.
this up?
Here's what the insurance companies are doing. They go through 10-year cycles of high profits and then they start declining. Why do they decline? They decline when they're high interest rates. They want to grab the premiums from their business customers and put it in the bank at 14, 15% interest. So in order to grab, Travelers wants to grab premiums against Aetna, they start competing for less. So they start competing, they start reducing their prices, and their rate of return goes down. It went down to 3% on net worth in 1984. That's when the tornado hits. Then they all got together, actually, through their trade association. They said, we've got to rapidly increase premiums. And they started hitting these trucking firms and small business daycare centers with 600% increases, 800% increases, and never had a claim. It's not like they're hitting someone who's had a lot of claims and very negligent, unsafe. Now, when they go through this, who are they going to blame? They're going to say, gee, we screwed up in the last 3 years, and we got to go for broke and get this money in. No, they want to blame juries, judges, lawyers, and the most vulnerable people, victims, who want their day in court. I mean, if you were injured for life because of an unsafe car, a sticking throttle in the car, which is a very common problem in terms of car defects. GM has recalled 10 million cars for the sticking throttle. And you're sitting there at a red light, all of a sudden the car shoots off, smashes into a building or another car, and you're crippled. In our country, we're number one in the world. We give people the right to sue General Motors, to pay the lawyer only if the lawyer wins, not to have to pay the lawyer if the lawyer loses. And there's a fairly good chance of beating General Motors. You could never do that in England or Canada or Austria. Almost unheard of. Because they have so many restrictions on victims' rights. Well, this is what the insurance companies want to do. They want to restrict victims' rights, bring them down to the Western European level so they don't have to pay out as much. That's the battle will go on in Oregon now, next year in the legislature. You see, here's again, the victim groups don't have $6 million to go on TV. The insurance companies are using your premium to propagandize you, to urge you to shoot yourself in the foot. Because anybody could be a victim. Anybody can get sick from toxic waste or chemicals or workplace hazards.
What can we do to keep people from taking advantage of the system that we have where we can sue?
Well, first of all, it's very hard to win a case in court. Now, if a lawyer wants to take a frivolous suit on your behalf, right? You're faking an injury. The lawyer takes the case to sue the court. First of all, the judge is no fool. And your defendant, who you sue, is no fool. If they see you don't have a case, they say to the judge, we want a summary judgment, which means the judge hears your case preliminarily, finds out there's nothing to it, and dismisses it. Bingo. Number two, the lawyer gets a bad reputation. The lawyer begins to lose credibility. So next case the lawyer brings, the judge is going to say, here comes this lawyer again. He brought a phony suit last time. If he does it this time, I'm going to censure him. So this idea of there are a lot of phony suits is just so much propaganda. Now, there are some consumers who defraud insurance companies. I mean, they slash their car, and that's that. And the insurance companies have all kinds of investigators to ferret this out. Then they put you on a blacklist and all the rest. But now they're putting you on a blacklist even if you file a legitimate suit against us. They have a service where doctors, you go to a doctor, right? And the doctor for the first time doesn't know who you are. They plug into a computer and say, hey, this fellow came from Oklahoma, and he sued a doctor and recovered. This guy's a troublemaker. I'm not going to have him as a patient. So now there's a countering service developing that tells you whether doctors have been sued successfully for incompetence. So you can stay away from certain incompetent doctors. 15 to 30,000 doctors in our country out of 400,000. According to the medical profession's own estimates, like the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, a very first-rate journal, Dr. Arnold Relman, 15 to 30,000 are very tragic cases of drug addicts, alcoholics, infirm, sick, or too elderly to practice competent medicine. You see, you don't know the names of those people. So we're going to be in a battle of computer data banks.
If we want to move into education more,
Sure.
Instead of I guess the first one I like that is it's when you've toured in California and some of the other areas that had funding cut back, have you seen an actual decrease in the quality of education? Do you see problems occurring now?
Well, Reagan's infinitely more cruel than any president in modern history. Look what he's doing now. He wants to cut, by the way, he wanted to cut huge chunks of federal aid to college students and grants. But now he's cutting $100 million from aid for disabled youngsters who are often shut out of mainstream education unless they have certain programs to aid them. Wants to cut out vocational aid to handicapped teenagers. He wanted to eliminate the infant nutrition program for poor infants and mothers, which reduced infant mortality. There's no end to this man's cruelty. The only thing longer than his cruelty is a smile. A smile covers it up. You ever have a teacher who smiles as the teacher is dismissing you, penalizing you? That's kind of right. So the cutbacks have not yet they affected the weakest, the most defenseless youngsters in school. And it's harder and harder now to get federal grants and loans if you want to go to college. As a matter of fact, if Congress didn't block him in 81, 82, 83, he'd have really run Russia. He doesn't believe in federal aid to college students. And he would have run Russia. There were 1 million college students on the streets unable to afford going to school without loans or grants. So, but I don't want you to get the impression that money and quality of education correlates firmly up and down the scale. Your education's quality can triple just with a change in your attitudes and the teacher's attitudes and the principal's attitudes. Let me give you an illustration. Up here we have these 8 pagers, each on a particular consumer topic. One is on insurance, one's on autos, one's on food, one is on phony billing practices, one's on repairs, one's on addictions, smoking, drugs, and so on. Now, in most schools, high schools, you don't learn how to buy. You don't really have consumer skills courses. Some states require it, but it's so boring. It's just like you just have a book you just memorize. It's kind of like memorization to regurgitation to vegetation. They don't, for example, take you down to small claims court, teach you how to use small claims court. Take you down to the supermarket, develop a little software program on supermarket price comparisons. So you can compare 50 breadbasket items, the same brand name can of peas in 20 supermarkets, and then put out a release every week of prices, different supermarkets, so the press can pick it up. That's what the students did in Bloomington, Indiana. And one professor analyzed their impact, said they depressed prices on the average 3%, food prices, just for doing that. Because every time the supermarket ended up the most expensive, they said, oh, we can't be number one and most expensive next week. So you learn all these things. You learn, for example, how do you go down and buy a car? What do you do? Go to a dealer and say, I'm yours, dealer, take it. Right? Or why do you buy cosmetics? Now, you see, let's just talk about something really personal, like cosmetics and personal appearance and all the rest. Now, we grow up buying into a certain standard of beauty. You know that. I mean, for example, if I said to you, you are compassionate young people, I'm going to assume that. And I'm going to say to you, you got a choice. You can either save 10 lives in Portland, Oregon and pay a price for it. I'll tell you what the price is. Or have those 10 people die and not pay the price that you're going to have to pay. You say, what's the price? Well, 10 people, and you'll know their names, will be saved if you agree to extending your nose 2.5 inches permanently for the rest of your life. How many of you would do that? No function in it, no different function in smelling. You still can smell. You can blow your nose. I have to use your hand like that. You see, you would say that is like a sentence. It's like the rest of your life people will veer away from you, right? What? I mean, you see, we have such tyrannical standards of appearance that when you see somebody who has a certain welt on their face, you kind of go back. And you have awful epithets. When I was in high school, this is what really turned me off. When my buddies would look at a girl who had wonderful personality and everything, and they called her a pig because she wasn't pretty. You see? And you see the cruelty that's involved here? How can anybody determine that's the way they were born, right? We don't have much of a tolerance for that. And the people who meet the standard of handsome and beauty are given great deference in our society. They're given great reward. Now, to top it off, we also buy into the cosmetic world, right? Where you see no one, you really had a mind of your own. You say, what the hell do I want to do? Get up in the morning and spend 20 minutes painting my face, putting the stuff over my eyelids, etc. For who? I mean, I don't want to get that gunk in my eyes. It stings to begin with. And for who? You see? For who? Because there are very tyrannical standards of proper makeup, and otherwise you're not in. You're not part of the group. You're a deviant. You're a maverick. You thumbed your nose at Revlon. And the rest of it. So the interesting thing is that we never get a chance to be like anthropologists and to look, to step aside for a moment and to look at ourselves. And to look at it. I just walked down the corridor. You could see it all. You could see the way, the conversations. You've got a very sexist division of personality out there. I mean, the young women play a certain role. The young men play a certain role. And you waste a lot of energy and you waste a lot of your own potential by worrying about appearances and the right language and the right slang and who goes with who and who does what and whether you can brag about damaging your health more than your fellow person. Same is true with the vending machines. You have vending machines here? Yeah. Okay. Who determines what's in them? Why don't you determine what's in them, like some high schools have in the past? Why do you let the vending machine operators put that junk and crap full of coloring additives and sugar and salt and very low on nutrition in that machine when you can have a little nutrition exercise? Listen, it's not boring at all. You don't get the right nutrition now, you get away with it. But when you're 40, 50, 60 years old, you're going to pay a penalty. High blood pressure, maybe cancer, different kinds of diseases when you have high fat, high salt, high sugar, high calorie additive content. That's what that junk food has. And so you say to yourself, we're going to have a little student committee on nutrition, and we are going to get the best information from various national consumer groups, like the National Center for Science and Public Interest, and we will have a specific recommendation, and we're going to tell the vending machines, this is what we want. And you see, all of this prepares you to be skilled buyers. That means you know how to get value for your money, you know how to advance your own health, preserve your own safety, and that of your relatives and your family. That's important. I mean, cars are safer today. Fewer teenagers are being killed in cars. If you had airbags in cars, you wouldn't lose as many teenagers as you would lose. No. And you see, when the tragedy comes, you say, oh, gee, you know, too bad, wish we'd done this, wish we'd done that. The key civilized mind, and the real educated mind, is a mind that anticipates, that plans, that foresees problems and forestalls it, not a mind that reacts, weeps, and moans and groans. And that's the difference between an educated mind and a reactor, a human reactor. Just wait till somebody does you in and then you try to make the best of it. You see, do you ever have a public discussion on cosmetics and standards of beauty? Probably how to use cosmetics, huh? They come and they tell you, you know, if you apply it here or there, you even got some stuff on the ear and there. It's a manipulation. They're manipulating you. You're a huge multi-billion-dollar industry, teenage cosmetics. And they manipulate. One day, you know, 1 year something's in, and the new kind of cosmetic, and they got the boys now dressing themselves up, his or her cosmetics. So you want to ask yourself, how intricate is your thought process? Are you really excited about ideas? And to question the assumptions of the power structure that comes in on it. I mean, they're feeding you this stuff on TV. You can't talk back to TV, can you? Why not?
In the interview in 1985, you talked about student apathy and how they don't take advantage of leadership opportunities. Do you think that they don't really care what's happening? Do you think that's getting worse or better?
Well, there's always been, a majority of the students have always been, quote, apathetic, even in the 60s, early 70s. It's the small number of active students who need to increase their numbers. So if like 1% of the college student body is active, instead of just saying, gee, 99% not active, we're just going to do our own thing, our 1%. They should try to move out and make it 2%, 3%, 4%. The reason apathy is a function of a lot of things. See, we often use the word apathy as a conclusion. Students are apathetic, period, exclamation point. But apathy, one, is a function of lack of experience and knowledge to make a difference. I mean, you're apathetic if you think you're nothing when it comes to City Hall, when it comes to General Motors. If you think you can't make a difference, if you think you're powerless, you're going to be apathetic. That's the ultimate definition of apathy, is being a slave. And that's the ultimate. You're sitting there, huh? The chains and the dust. So it's a function of apathy, of powerlessness, a feeling that you can't make a difference. The minute students are given an opportunity to make a difference, like in the Vietnam War period, or civil rights, or environment, the Great Earth Day in 1970, which made the environmental issue national news, that was student-created, student-managed. And the minute that happens, the students start getting fired up. And you may not think you can do anything on the arms race, the global arms race, but you can do something with the vending machine. That's a step. Once you do something with the vending machine, you go on to something bigger, and then something bigger, and then you become very strategically oriented and tactically oriented. Those of you who play basketball or football, you know, strategy and tactics are key. And you're never allowed to give up, right? You can be behind in basketball by 30 points. If you ever went to the coach in the third period and said, Coach, you got us by 30 points. There's no use my staying around. I got to see an early movement. Now, I've never allowed you to do that. But you see, in the citizen area, it's very conventional. You try a little bit, you give up. A few years ago, students came up to me in Ohio and they said, that damn polluter down the road, the company polluting the air, we've been trying to stop that pollution for 3 weekends. And we've not known. I said, 3 weekends? Almost 3 weekends? What a display of standards. You want to take some of the values on the athletic arena, where you don't give up, you're tactical, you're strategic, you're determined, you're resilient, and then say, how come you don't apply it to things that really count? That's because we don't grow up learning how to be skilled citizens. You have a course here at the high school on citizen training, okay, where you can plunge into real hot controversial issues in Portland, investigate them, expose them. That's part of your course. You call it City Hall Expose 101. But you have to ask yourself, why don't you have that kind of course? Because you're entitled to have it.
You mentioned athletics and why don't we put the effort that we put into athletics into the classroom. Do you support the no play on the house rule?
Oh, sure. What is it? Is a high school a playing field? The playing field is an adjunct to the high school. You go to learn. The same is true for college. I mean, Jim Muscle comes from Villanova. Villanova's won the basketball championship in NCAA last year. It's the only school that has graduated all its players in the big, time basketball. In some schools, which one is it? Only one or something?
Memphis State, one basketball player since 1967 has graduated.
Oh my God.
They're great on slam dunks. You see, they're exploited. They're basically exploited. They're used to give a high profile to the school, and the alumni love it, and so on. And these poor youngsters are exploited. And then when they're through, they're thrown out like so much floats in the jets. So we really need that. The academic function is number one. Then, once you meet these standards, you play ball. It's not only for the students, it's to keep the coaches and the schools from exploiting the students.
A lot of arguments is that the busier a person is, the higher his grades are. And although I support the no house, no play, a lot of the opposition says that if you take that away from him, what's he gonna put his efforts into?
The student might begin to find that they have no alternative but to start studying. You push them up against the wall. A little distance.
Well, with that, then, how do you feel about the, I guess you could term them almost exorbitant, like athletic scholarships and all the money that students will get just to go to college?
I don't believe that. I don't believe in athletic scholarships. They either do one of two things. They pay the athletes just like they pay janitors. Just like they pay employees of the college. We're going to have librarians, we're going to pay them. We're going to have athletes, we're going to pay. Or they come in like any other students. If they qualify academically, they come in. If they have a certain talent in sports, they go out for the team. I mean, the corruption's been exposed recently. Donna, George, and else. It's just, under that table, they seduce these athletes into taking money illegally. And then, who gets prosecuted? Huh? They really nail the athlete. The guys who set up the system often escape. Very often. Yes.
We have, it's lunchtime now, and we'll move on to the next slide. Period? Same format, Pete?
That's it.
Okay, have at it.
Okay, thank you. You'll have to pardon me, I have a little inflammation of the nerves, so I have to speak a little bit on the side. It takes a while to recover, so you just have to wait it out. But I hope you can hear me in the back, can you? Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Let me just describe the subjects maybe that we cover, just to keep the discussion from going to the planet Mars. Areas of consumer protection, which can be anything from insurance to banking to autos to cosmetics to drugs. Corporate power, monopoly power, political influence of large corporations like General Electric, General Dynamics, General Motors, Colonel Sanders, and then the interaction with government and the media, access to the media. If you're representing the statistics of the Carnegie study, watch more television than you spend time in classroom in your life. The average American watches 25 hours a week. And very little attention is given to what rights people have to get better programming, because the television stations use our public airways, just like the rivers, the air, public airways. The television stations get a license to use it, and they decide who says what on TV and radio, who can't say what on TV and radio, using our public airways and paying nothing for the license. You pay more for your auto license. The biggest TV station pays the Federal Communications Commission for its license. And I think that they make more money than you do. So we can discuss any of these issues. Particularly, I want to try and get you to suddenly see things that you've been observing but not seeing for years. That may not be clear to you, but I hope it will be after the class is over. So can we start with these terrific questions or comments that you're noted for at this high school? Anybody want to start? Yeah.
What do you think about college entrance exams? Are they affect ability?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. The question is, what do I think of college entrance exams, like the SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test, the PSAT? Number one, don't ever let the score you get on those exams affect your self-confidence or affect your determination as to what you want to be in life. These exams, I will hasten to say, are specialized forms of fraud. These are multiple choice questions that say to you, we don't want to hear what you have to say writing English essay. We don't want to hear you challenge whether the right answer is the right answer. We don't want you to develop your critical capacity and see certain nuances, you know, life isn't all black and white. We just want you to find out what the right answer out of 4. A, B, C, D. None of the above. Why do they give you these tests? They do not measure the most important features of your personality for success in life. They don't even purport to. Now, in each one of your minds is a certain personality feature. But we all know that these are following critical ingredients for achievement, success, and contribution to justice in life. Your experience, judgment, wisdom, creativity, imagination, idealism, persistence, and stamina. None of them are measured in any way by the SAT. But presumably they measure everything else that's important about it. Why do they give you these tests? Because they produce a number. Because they're easily scored by machine. Because no one can be blamed in high schools or colleges for being biased or subjective. Because they say, they, out there at Princeton, New Jersey, education test series, they developed the test and they're objective. And they're not out to get John Jones or Susie Richards in this high school. There's no bias there. So it has a superficial objectivity when it really is very subjective. What do you mean, subjective? Because how well you do on these scores, on the average, correlates with family income. Isn't that a rational correlation? If you're poor, or lower economic class, you don't have books at home, you're just barely making ends meet, you have a different type of experience in life, your grandmother may not speak English, whatever. On the average, the higher up you go, the better off you are. It's an uncanny correlation. Now, the test makers call it, they call it cultural bias. They admit to it. They call it cultural bias. Some would use stronger words. Now, the worst part of these tests is that you internalize these test scores that you get as a measure of your self-worth and self-esteem, and proceed to put yourself on a pecking order with your fellow students. Oh, you know, this student did very well. I didn't do very well. I'm stupid. I'm not worth much. You see? very destructive. What you got to do is realize that you may have to take them, play it like a game. There are all kinds of coaching courses and manuals. There are all kinds of little tricks now. They've got all kinds of tricks, these coaching schools, where they can get you to spot the questions that don't count, so you don't have to spend time answering. They always put some experimental questions in, but they don't grade them. Or they show you different correlations of how certain questions, the right answer is always either A or D. I mean, that's how tricky it's become, you know. The point is, play the game because you want to get into the school of your choice. But don't ever take it seriously in terms of a measure of your own worth and productivity in life. Some of the best doctors and lawyers I've seen in the United States could barely have passed the SAT because they had other qualities, like creativity, judgment. Furthermore, some of these questions on the SAT and other similar tests, they penalize the student who's really insightful, because the student who dares to pause and try to figure out an ambiguity is the student who loses time. And if you lose time on the test, you lose, right? Because you don't finish the test. So don't let it affect your self-confidence and what you want to be in life. Never say to yourself, I want to be a biologist or a lawyer, but I didn't do well on the test. Just play the game and then try to change it. Heap ridicule out. It deserves a lot of ridicule. You know what's happening? Not only does it stratify you vis-a-vis your fellow students in a non-rational way, but it now it's a numbers game between schools. Oh, this high school's got higher average test scores than other high schools. You get Reagan on TV saying education is improving because they have higher test scores. All it means is that more schools are offering coaching courses. So you can get 25, 50 points, 100 points higher on your test scores. And so it becomes a battle between school districts, and they all fool themselves into thinking that education is up or down in a school district based on these scores. Now, if I took a long time to answer that, it's because one, I think it's an important question. Two, I never want you to forget the answer. Don't ever let it affect your self-confidence. Once you lose your self-confidence, you're through as a happy, productive person. I don't just mean, being good, getting a good job. You're miserable 24 hours a day if you're awake that long, once you lose your self-confidence. And third, we put out a major report on the Educational Testing Service in 1980. So we've been in this for a long time. We've got a lot of internal memos, studies from ETS, and we know the doubts they have about their own tests, but they're selling the tests, admissions officials are accepting them, so why change?
Have you come up with any alternatives to the ETS? Because
yes. The alternatives are twofold. One is you recognize the individual student personality for what he or she is. Namely, a complex, diverse body of students, which means you got the teachers and others, admission officials got to spend more time interviewing students, more time evaluating their strengths. You may have poor test scores, you may be a terrific organizer. You may have great organizing talents in the community. So you have to ask students, what have they done, not just what they know. These multiple choice, they don't test what you know. The criterion tests do. They really test what you know in terms of physics and so on. These are like crossword puzzles. They don't really test what you know. And so that you want to spend more time evaluating students. This is a shortcut. Machine scored, you got X on the test. They pigeonhole you. Because students have a whole diversity of strengths. And if someone said to you, look, we're going to test you for your athletic prowess. Okay? So 500 students step up to be tested for their athletic prowess. The coach says, step into this gymnasium. You're going to the gymnasium. And the only test is badminton. They test you for badminton. The bird. Okay? And then it's all over. And you say, hey, what do you mean? What are you talking about? You just test us for badminton. Why don't you test us for basketball, football, soccer, tennis, badminton. You don't do well in badminton, you don't pass the athletic test. That's what they're doing to you with these SAT, these multiple choice tests. So if someone said to you, you can get in the best college of your choice, but you have to pass the following test. Get on your knees with a big beach ball and push it 100 yards with your nose. Now, what do you think most students will be seen doing throughout the school year in their spare time? So the tests are shaping the curriculum. They're shaping the courses. The teachers have got the tests on their mind because they're judged by how well you do on these stupid multiple choice tests. I emphasize multiple choice standardized tests. They don't ask you to write essays much anymore. They don't ask what you do. So the answer is you have tests that really find out what you know, how you can solve real problems, and make analysis of history, literature, essays. And the second is that they test you for what you've done in life, your extracurricular activity, your talents, your skills that don't relate to an SAT type score result. And third, you've got to spend more time evaluating, find just where your strengths and interests are, rather than pigeonhole you in some machine test score. It takes more time, but it deserves more time. There's nothing more important than giving you a chance to express your diversity of strengths, and rather than pigeonhole it. Yeah.
Well, how do these major colleges feel about those arguments we made?
Well, they're getting more skeptical. Bates and Bowdoin College and several others say they'll accept you without you taking an SAT. Harvard is studying. Everybody's waiting for Harvard to finish its report, because if it says Harvard's not going to require SAT, then hundreds of schools will follow Harvard. Follow the leader type thing. But the admission officials, they like it because it gets them off the hook, doesn't it? They can't be accused of subjectivity and bias and so on. So it's just a test. Now, they say they don't give it big significance, but in many schools they do. When I went to Harvard Law School, I had sitting next to me students who had a C average at CCNY. And I said, well, how the hell did you get into Harvard Law School? He said, because I was in the 97th percentile on the LSAT. So they always talk, that they don't give it much significance, but a lot of them still do.
You feel this way about all the tests that, like there's an ACT and other tests also that can get us into college. You feel this way about all of them?
All the multiple choice. Now, there are tests that test they test what you learned in your courses. You see, and they give you the opportunity to write the mother tongue. The English language. Heaven forbid. You should write the English language. I mean, the best educated students that have ever come out of school have come out of universities when there's virtually no testing, where there's a lot of writing essays, and there's a lot of discussion with their teachers. Oxford and Cambridge. That's why you say, gee, you're from Oxford. Somebody says they're from Oxford, I say, they know how to string 7 sentences together, grammatically. we get the best students out of Harvard Law School and Yale Law School. More than half of them can't write English. They're absolutely brilliant students, and they know the points and the insight. They can't write English. They got to learn how. We give them essay tests before we hire them. We say, okay, write a 1,000-word essay on nutrition. And they say, nutrition? We're law school graduates. And we say, do you eat? Can you write a 1,000-word essay on nutrition? Do you know how to investigate City Hall? Huh? Do you know how to write a critique of political advertisement on TV? Like Reagan's political ads? Can you take apart a political speech? Like the one on Nicaragua that Reagan gave about a month and a half ago? Set a world-class record for lies. Can you answer this question? So-and-so was killed in the car. What was the reason? What would you think? Give me 5 quick reasons, right now. Hypothetical reasons, causes for that person being killed. Ready?
Drunk driving.
Okay, what else? Every one of them related to the driver. For what reason? Sorry, there is one that related to cars. See how we come at it? It's up behind the wheel. It's the drunk. It's the careless. See? Well, now I could say, well, that caused the first crash. You didn't tell me what caused the injury. I said what caused someone getting killed. Now you can be drunk or careless, and you go out of control and you smash into a tree. You caused the first crash. Okay? Let's assume you caused the first crash. That isn't what kills you. What kills you is the second crash when you go through the windshield or into the steering column. The only reason you get hurt in a collision is that the car stops a split second before you do. You see? And so you say, well, if that car was built in a crash-worthy way, with airbags, collapsible steering columns, etc., you would not have been hurt very much. So you see, we come at it from, you blame the driver. Well, the driver has a role. But we don't ever think of the car, although more than 20 years ago we think of the car, protecting you in a crash. Because we never see it on TV. It's always, you know, the driver, stop drinking, etc., etc. No one says, hey, look, GM, stop building drunk cars. You know, cars that are under-braked, that are poor handling, that in a crash fold like a Japanese lantern. Build cars that your engineers know how to build. You're already required to put padded dash panels, collapsible steering columns, stronger door latches, elastic windshields, head restraints. All those are saving lives. Seat belts, shoulder irons. But they have to be required to do that 10, 20 years ago. Even though they have it on the shelf ready for 30 years. You see how we come off? We accept the corporate definition of the cause of the crash because they don't want to blame the car. They want to blame the driver entirely. Yes.
What cars do you think now are safe? It's like when you went against GM with the Corvair. What cars do you think now symbolize like the same?
I can answer that question better, except that Reagan stopped putting the tests in a booklet, which Carter used to put out. You know, you could buy a car book and they compare the various car makes and models. But the best answer is one: a larger car is more protection than a smaller. I mean, would you rather be in a Buick or a Volkswagen Beetle? Number 2, use your seatbelt and shoulder harness. This is a major survival difference until we get automatic airbags, which are much better at higher speeds, etc. And number 3, the difference now, for example, if I had to buy a car, I don't know anything. If I had to buy a car, I'd buy a used Volvo because I think it has the best combination of handling, braking, crash protection. Not by a big difference, but all together in one car, I think it's up there right up the front. But basically, it's a large car with seatbelt shoulder harness.
Why would you buy a used?
To keep the price down. All right, we've got airbags in 12,000 cars for now 12 years, because they were offered by GM as an option. Ford had a few, Volvo had a few. They've traveled 1 billion miles, they've been in 180 crashes, spectacular safety. Grandmother and 2 grandchildren, major crash in Florida, they walked away. 2 elderly women in Utah, swerved to avoid the car, smashed into a tank truck, 40 miles an hour. They didn't even know they had an airbag, because it was a used automobile. All of a sudden, they walked away. They had a few. They had not just with minor injuries. They were recovered. They go on TV now and say how wonderful airbag. Mercedes has about 20,000 now in the U.S. with the driver's seat only. I don't know what they have against the right front seat. Ford is now offering airbags as options for Tempo and Topaz. When they offer these options, it's expensive. It's $800. If they had standard equipment, it would be $250. And there's a new mechanical airbag developed out of a firm in New Jersey. It's going to go for $120. you, you know, a vinyl roof costs more. An optional vinyl roof costs more than $200. An air conditioner costs $800. So here you have a safety feature that may save your life. And also, the insurance companies in writing, State Farm also, they said they'd knock off $50 a year in insurance premium. So it's like you pay $250, you get $50 back every year. It's better than you can do at the bank. Now, are we going to get airbags? Yeah. Yeah, we've been working on it now. Listen, I'm going to guarantee you're going to get airbags. I ain't got you to promise you. We're going to nail GM to the wall on this one. GM started out big airbag champion because of one man, President GM, Ed Cole, in the early 70s. He said he was going to put airbags in all GM cars, vans, and light trucks by the fall of 1974. That's the 1975 model. The trouble is he had to retire, mandatory retirement, and he lost his power in late 73. And his successors reversed his policy, said they were going to fight Washington regulation young industry all the way. I mean, even shooting their own engineers in the foot were developed and refined the airbag. Now GM, because Ford offered it, because the U.S. government has bought 5,000 airbag-foot cars for the government employees, that was an end run we maneuvered around Reagan. Reagan campaigned against the airbag. See, his definition of freedom on the highway is the freedom to go through a windshield, not the freedom to survive. So he campaigns against the airbag, and then when he gets elected, it wasn't that people voted for him because he was against the airbag. He just gave, in Detroit one day, to the auto company executive who was against the airbag, he revoked the crash protection standard that Carter issued in 77, effective in 82 cars. Started in 82 cars. He revoked it, and the Supreme Court ruled 2 years later unanimously that he acted illegally. But it was too late. You know, they told him to go back and issue it again. He did, full of loopholes, and it still isn't in effect. So we got the U.S. government to buy 5,000 airbags. So now GM has announced they're going to offer on unnamed models optional airbags in the fall of '87. The unnamed models will start with Cadillac, because the Cadillac people are saying, hey, Mercedes, you know, our competitors, they're coming in with airbags. They look like they're technology advanced. And we can't engage in. Not that they want to save lives. They don't want to be accused of technology lag. So they're coming in. So we'll get it. By the early 90s, you'll see hundreds of thousands of cars. Your friends will go into airbags instead of going to hard steel or plastic.
Okay, now you said you want to promise us airbags. Is this going to be in all brands of the cars?
First, they'll do the option bit. They'll try to do the option bit. But then the great success of airbags and the publicity with people being saved in Portland and Seattle, you know, every day, will pressure them to go standard equipment. They'll go standard. All we really need is one Japanese auto company left. If Honda says, we're going to go with airbags, they'll all go, be like a Domino's. See, they can't, like GM went because of Mercedes, and Chrysler now, led by Lee Iacocca, who hates airbags, irrationally, hates airbags, and he's now saying, look, Ford, Ford's got it, they're offering airbags. What are we going to do? So they're on the verge of making some announcement. So it's like they all mimic each other. Yeah.
Just go back to education real quick. Part of the problem that we kind of see going through all the entrance exams and stuff is that they want a really broad personality curriculum. They want all the credentials and everything without, I mean, it seems like when we look at the people around here, it seems like we see which ones are the hard workers, a lot of them aren't getting it.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's better to, I mean, what are the advantages of, say, a really curricular-oriented person compared to someone that isn't, do you think the extracurricular activities work?
Well, they're marginally. They make the difference in marginal cases. I think that they really look at your grades and your SATs. And if you're just under the level of acceptance, if you have a great extracurricular, it'll make the difference. Unless you're good in athletics, and that's the main extracurricular that really makes a difference. That is a really big factor. If you're a great track star, basketball player. They won't admit it. I'm not just talking about the, the state universities who have big athletic scholarships. I'm talking about the small liberal arts schools even. It is a foreign thing, because they just don't get that many athletes to make a credible team. That is a
I'd like to turn around just for a second here, where the public has anticipated something that may seem as harmful and instigated something to evade the problem. But there's a question of rights. In the New Republic of 1981, you said the Public Health Service, the fluoride companies and the dentists on one side, the consumers on the other side, fluoridation has been promoted without giving consumers a free choice. How relevant is this today, and is there really a rights violation?
Well, in that area, yes, because they put it in all the water. They put it in all the water, and there isn't. And they only say it's effective for youngsters in terms of preventing cavities. It doesn't affect people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on. So there's also a question of total fluoride intake. There may not be too much fluoridation of fluoride in the water, but you may be getting it in the food, in the air, and the total intake is dangerous. My argument is that you don't fluoridate water unless you know what the total fluoride intake is in the community. Number two, you don't fluoridate water unless you know that it doesn't combine with other chemicals or organic matter in the water to create even more dangerous chemicals like chlorine combines with organic matter in the water to create carbon tetrachloride, which is a carcinogen. And number three, you put it up for public referendum. As long as you're going to put it in the public drinking water, you put it up for public referendum. And give plenty of time people to debate their views and discuss. Well, that's a peculiar case because it involves something that everybody has to use unless they can afford bottled water.
Can I follow up on that real quick? Okay. We debated this year on a water topic, and one of our cases dealt with the trihalomethanes created by the chlorination action of organic compounds. And one solution that seemed very plausible was the biological activated carbon system used in Europe. It seems to be very effective, yet you read books, they say Americans are crazy because they don't use it. Why not? I don't understand.
You go to major European cities, they use activated carbon systems at the waterworks to filter out these harmful ingredients. The first city in the United States to use activated carbon will be Cincinnati, Ohio. We're way behind Western Europe. Now, we worked like the Dickens 12 years ago to get a safe drinking water through Congress, and we finally got it through, and Ford signed it. And Carter started issuing proposed standards and some standards, and a lot of the scientific work was done. And Reagan came into office, and he has not issued a single standard. He's now being forced by Republicans and Democrats in Congress. We're about to send him a bill to require him to issue standards. You know, a lot of carcinogenic chemicals and other ingredients in the water that don't belong there. So that's the problem. Mr. Reagan will not do anything about the drinking water that affects 120 million people who drink water that isn't fit to drink in this country, unless we can prove that the contamination of America's drinking water is due to an international communist conspiracy. He's totally focused on the commies and the Reds. If we can hook it to the Sandinistas, he'll make it a top. And he doesn't really, in contrast to his flattery of Americans, how he flatters you, and he has the great patriotic symbols and so on. When you actually look at his record, it is utterly contemptuous of the rights of children and infants to decent nutrition, the rights of children to be protected from asbestos in their schools, of the health and safety standards from autos to food and drug. He's given in to the industry, to the big boys, to the corporations. And you always have to watch it. Whenever you get someone coming on TV who's pleasant, tells you what you want to hear and the rest, you got to say, what has this politician actually done? What is his record? Never mind his rhetoric. It's his record that you measure it.
You're talking about government catering to big business.
Yeah.
Let's talk about airline deregulation for a bit. Since then, since airlines have been regulated, prices have dropped significantly and flying is much more expensive. Some say that that safety standards may be compromised in the
for airline deregulation, but when I was testifying, I said 2 qualifications. One, there had to be unstinting enforcement of safety standards. Because I knew there were going to be a lot of new carriers, and they were going to start cutting corners, price competition, affecting their maintenance. And second, that there be strong antitrust enforcement, so they don't end up, there'll be 3 times the number of airline companies, then they start going bankrupt, and then they buy each other up, and then in 5, 6 years we end up with 5 giant airlines who, shall we say, learn how to set prices. Well, airline deregulation came. In came the companies, Air Florida, People's Express, and so on. Prices on many routes, but not all, were cut. Some routes where you don't have that competition, the prices are outrageous. And some routes were canceled and replaced by little commuter, dinky type aircraft, which are more dangerous. And now what we're seeing is more evidence that they're cutting on maintenance and safety. Second, there aren't as many experienced controllers, air traffic controllers. Reagan fired 11,000 of them for striking. He never replaced any of them years later, even though study after study showed that the existing air traffic controllers were fatigued and overburdened, etc., stressed. And thirdly, they're starting to buy each other up. You see, Northwest wants to buy Republic, and People's just bought Frontier. And Eastern is going to be bought, if the government doesn't stop it, by Texas, by Continental Airlines. And so they're heading toward that 5 or 6 biggie. And so we may end up worse than we started off. Because you can't get deregulation working unless you make sure the competition is preserved and safety. Yeah.
What do you think the government's responsibilities are to support the homeless in America? And what social programs are effective in dealing with them? And also, how much do you think the cultural bias you spoke of affects how they deal
With what?
the homeless?
Cultural bias?
Yes.
Well, first of all, here we are, the richest country in the world, by and large. There's some countries smaller, got more per capita income, and like Switzerland. But you know, we're well off as a country. We should have a policy. No one is homeless. Period. Now, why are there so many homeless? One reason is because our mental health policies changed. We got them out of the factory of these mental health institutions. And about half to 60% of the homeless have serious mental health problems. And they're people who need help. They need care. There are sometimes when the city goes to put them in a shelter, they don't want to go. They just want to live in the streets. They don't want to have any contact with any human being. Severe schizophrenic, for example. But we don't do ourselves any good. We don't do our international reputation any good. We don't do our compassion any good by having over 1 million people homeless in the streets and a significant number dying off. We should have an automatic shelter policy. There's no way we can allow people to live in the streets and be preyed upon, brutalized by some of the common criminals, which is occurring every day.
So since the trend is towards deinstitutionalization, do you think like more stringent standards to deal with the mentally ill more than
Well, we don't want to put them back in these old type mental health hospitals. There are mental health clinics. There are ways where you can not totally institutionalize them, not totally deinstitutionalize them, but you care for them. You give them some meaningful things to do during the day. If they're prone to violence, you've got to deal with that. I mean, you don't want to lump them into one category. But the states vary enormously in the way they treat mental health patients. We just put out a report ranking the states in mental health, and there are great differences. And some states have improved quite significantly in the last few years.
How would you advocate paying for some more funding for these problems? You're talking about shelters for the homeless. What would you suggest on a national basis?
Well, this class is making a lot of noise. I can't quite hear.
You said for homes for the homeless.
Yeah.
And what would you suggest we do as far as on a national basis to fund these programs?
Well, they can be funded nationally or federal. I mean, if we're going to, you see, we'll have trouble answering your question if you're going to continue we're going to continue as a nation to bloat the military budget. It's up to almost $1 billion a day, loaded with fraud, corruption, and redundancy. You've heard the stories. You've seen the reports. And if we're going to cut corporate taxes down to the lowest in modern times, you're going to get a huge deficit, and then you're going to get the government saying we can't afford a few $100 million for the homeless a year. We can't afford financial aid to students to go to college. We can't afford nutrition programs for the infants. We can't afford to keep the Library of Congress open in the evening. Do you know that Russia, the Lenin Library in Moscow is open 91 hours a week, and the Library of Congress has just cut its hours by 30%. It's now open 52 hours a week. The flagship library in the United States of America never closed down, never limited its hours in World War I, World War II, or in the Depression. So the key thing is, if we tax corporations at the level they were taxed in the prosperous 60s, we cut the deficit in half. That's over $100 billion. And if we cut the large, fat corruption out of the Pentagon, that's another $80 billion. And you can, almost pick and choose how to make the other 10 or 20 billion. Make the timber companies pay clear market for their timber on federal lands is one start. But you see, that's where the money is going. That's where the money is being spent, and that's where the taxes are not being paid. To have that kind of impact on all these smaller programs, which are of great importance in terms of our scale of human value. Yes?
What would you say the key negative impact of Redmond would be if the Supreme Court does not rule it unconstitutional?
Well, that's our case, by the way. Our lawyers are taking that case. We want it to circuit court, and our lawyer, Alan Morrison, just argued it before the Supreme Court. It will be declared unconstitutional. There's very little doubt about that. Now, what substitutes for it is the cuts are going to go, Social Security is exempt, interest on the national debt is exempt. By the time you start earning full paychecks, let's say 1990, 25 cents out of every dollar you send to Washington will go to pay the interest on the national debt. Ronald Reagan, who campaigns all over the world for a balanced budget, has doubled the national debt. Since George Washington to Jimmy Carter, he has more than doubled it. He's given us more deficits annually in 5 years than the entire deficits from Jimmy Carter back through George Washington. That's why you're going to be paying 25 cents on the dollar. Now, that means that's less money for other programs. Because in 1975, it's 3 cents on the dollar for the national debt. So the answer to your question is, those programs which are not supported by powerful interests, like oil companies, are going to be the ones that are going to be cut. So for the poor, and for environment, and for education, and for health, those are the ones that are going to be cut. Not the ones that are backed up. I mean, Reagan wants to give another profit, another tax benefit to the oil industry. He said, well, they're in tough times. Well, you can be sure when they come up again, they're not going to say, well, we'll now resume our payment of tax. Now, this is government by bully. This is a government by bully. David Stockman, who just put out this book, he was really tough on those infants. Oh, he wanted to cut the nutrition programs, the inoculation programs, and on. But he was afraid to take on the Pentagon and the military contract, even though he knew that was much bigger dollars. Yeah.
How can we, or why is legislation so slow on trying to reform corporate taxing policies?
Well, because that's where the lobbyists are. They're organized, and they tell the members of Congress, 1, we give you campaign money. 2, if you tax us, we're going to shut down unemployed workers. That's usually a bluff, of course. We've now seen studies by Citizens for Tax Justice and others that all these tax breaks the companies got in 81 were not plowed back into productive investment, which was the reason for giving them the tax break. So basically, the little taxpayer is not organized politically, is not organized in campaign funds, and it's the large companies that get the ear of the member.